They buried her reputation in the dirt. They whispered her name in shame. 32 years ago, in a small town outside Charlotte, North Carolina, a young black woman walked into a courtroom and told the truth. And for that truth, she lost everything. Her career, her family's respect, and the only home she had ever known. Her name was Vanessa Monroe, and her crime was refusing to lie. Tonight, we're going to witness something extraordinary. The man who orchestrated her downfall, the brilliant white defense attorney who built an empire on the ashes of her integrity, is standing on the steps of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. His hands are shaking. His eyes are wet. And he's holding a single piece of paper, a confession that could destroy what remains of his life. But this story doesn't begin here, in the present, with redemption at the door. No. To understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back. Back to 1993. Back to a sweating courtroom in August. Back to the day Vanessa Monroe stood up and said the two words that would change everything. I can't. The channel is growing because people like you appreciate stories that remind us why truth matters, even when it costs us everything. If this story already has you thinking about the choices we make when no one is watching, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to Story Haven, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Maybe you're in North Carolina, maybe you're clear across the country, but wherever you are, we're grateful you're here. Now, let's step back into that sweltering August morning when integrity collided with ambition. To understand the earthquake, you have to see the fault line. Vanessa Monroe grew up in West Charlotte, the daughter of a postal worker and a seamstress. Her parents, Thomas and Ruby Monroe, raised her in a tiny brick house on Beatty's Ford Road where the screen door never quite closed right and the air conditioner only worked when it felt like cooperating. They were faithful people, the kind who never missed Sunday service at Mount Zion Baptist Church, who tithed even when the bills were tight, who believed that God rewarded honest work. Vanessa was brilliant. Not just smart, but incandescent with potential. She was the first in her family to go to college, earning a full scholarship to North Carolina Central University School of Law. While other students were partying on Franklin Street, Vanessa was in the library until midnight, highlighter in hand, building the foundation for what she believed would be a career dedicated to justice. Her dream was simple: return to Charlotte, work as a public defender, help people who looked like her, who came from neighborhoods like hers, people who couldn't afford the attorneys in glass towers uptown. By 24, she'd passed the bar. By 25, she was hired by the Mecklenburg County Public Defender's Office. Her parents wept with pride the day she walked into that building wearing her first courtroom suit, second-hand from the Salvation Army, but pressed so crisp you'd never know. And for 3 beautiful years, Vanessa was exactly who she dreamed of being. She fought for kids caught up in the school-to-prison pipeline. She defended single mothers accused of crimes born from desperation. She won cases that more experienced lawyers said were unwinnable. Her colleagues called her the Bulldog because once she got hold of the truth, she never let go. But then came the Anderson case. And with it came Thomas Whitfield. Thomas Whitfield was everything Vanessa was not. Born in the historic Dilworth neighborhood, raised in a Victorian home with generational wealth built on tobacco and textiles, educated at Duke and Yale Law. By 38, he was a partner at Whitfield & Associates, the most prestigious criminal defense firm in the Carolinas. When wealthy men got into trouble, DUIs, white-collar fraud, assault charges that mysteriously disappeared, they called Thomas Whitfield. He was known for 3 things: his impeccable 3-piece suits, his bourbon collection, and his undefeated trial record. Thomas Whitfield had never lost a case. Not one. In 14 years. That perfect record was his religion, his identity, his armor against the doubt that sometimes crept in during the quiet hours before dawn. The Anderson case landed on both their desks in July of 1993. Gerald Anderson was a 42-year-old investment banker, white, married with 2 children, active in his Presbyterian church. He stood accused of embezzling $2.3 million from elderly clients, including a 78-year-old widow named Dorothy Chun who'd trusted him with her late husband's life insurance payout. The prosecution's star witness was Vanessa's client, Raymond Hayes, a 22-year-old black man who'd worked as Anderson's administrative assistant. Raymond claimed he'd been pressured to forge documents, to backdate files, to participate in the scheme under threat of being fired and blacklisted. He'd come forward when his conscience couldn't bear the weight anymore. The prosecution offered him immunity in exchange for testimony. Vanessa believed him. She'd spent hours with Raymond in the county jail's interview room, watching his hands shake when he described how Anderson had made him an accomplice, how he'd lost sleep for months knowing elderly people were being robbed. Thomas Whitfield saw something else entirely. He saw a convenient scapegoat. A young black man with a sealed juvenile record, nothing serious, shoplifting at 15, being used by prosecutors to take down a pillar of the Charlotte business community. The trial was set for August 23rd. Judge Harrison Caldwell presiding, a stern man 3 years from retirement who ran his courtroom like a military operation. The media descended on Mecklenburg County. This wasn't just another white-collar case. It was a story about race, class, and who the justice system chose to believe. 3 days before trial, Thomas Whitfield's private investigator handed him a folder. Inside was information that would guarantee his 15th consecutive victory. The investigator had found Raymond's younger brother, Marcus, a troubled 19-year-old with a drug problem. Marcus owed money to dangerous people. The investigator had made Marcus an offer: cash to pay his debts in exchange for testimony that would destroy his brother's credibility. Marcus would testify that Raymond had admitted to stealing the money himself, that he'd bragged about framing Anderson, that the whole story was a fabrication to avoid prison. It was a lie. Every word of it. But Marcus was desperate, high, and willing to say anything for the money that would keep him breathing. Thomas sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Duke Energy Center, looking out over the Charlotte skyline. He held that folder like it was burning his hands. He'd always operated in the gray areas of the law: aggressive cross-examination, evidence presented in the most favorable light, witnesses prepared to be unshakable. But this was different. This was suborning perjury. This was buying false testimony. This was a sin, not a strategy. But his undefeated record whispered to him. His partners whispered to him. His own pride whispered loudest of all. Just this once. Just to maintain the streak. Just to win. He called the investigator. "Do it," he said. Those 2 words sealed his fate and Vanessa's. The morning of August 23rd arrived with the kind of heat that makes asphalt shimmer. Vanessa walked into the courthouse in a Navy suit, her opening statement memorized, her faith in Raymond unshakable. She'd prayed that morning at her parents' kitchen table, asking God for the strength to speak truth clearly, to be Raymond's voice when his own was shaking. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Documents. Paper trails. Raymond's testimony was compelling, detailed, consistent. He looked the jury in the eye and admitted his own wrongdoing, his voice cracking when he described Dorothy Chen's face when she'd learned her savings were gone. "I was wrong to go along with it," he said. "But I'm trying to make it right now. I'm trying to tell the truth." Vanessa felt hopeful. The evidence was strong. Raymond was believable. Justice might actually prevail. Then came day 3. Thomas Whitfield rose to present his defense. He was magnetic in that courtroom, silver hair perfectly styled, voice like warm honey, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. He called Marcus Hayes to the stand. Vanessa's blood went cold when she saw him. She'd met Marcus twice when visiting Raymond's family. The young man on the stand looked different. Cleaned up, sober, coached. And when he started speaking, repeating the lies Thomas had paid him to tell, Vanessa understood immediately what had happened. She looked across the courtroom at Thomas Whitfield. For just a moment their eyes met. And in that instant she saw it, the flicker of shame quickly suppressed. He knew. He knew Marcus was lying, and he'd made it happen. But Vanessa was just a public defender. She had no private investigator, no resources to prove the perjury in real time. She could object, she could question Marcus on cross-examination, but without proof of the payoff, it was just his word against Raymond's. And juries, especially in 1993 Charlotte, were predisposed to believe certain narratives about young black men. The trial recessed for the day. Vanessa sat in her office, a converted supply closet on the 3rd floor, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles. She had a choice to make. She could call her supervisor, report her suspicion of witness tampering, trigger an investigation that might derail the trial. But without evidence, it could backfire. It might look like desperation, like a losing attorney grasping at straws. It could hurt Raymond more than help him. Or she could stay silent. Let the trial proceed. Hope the jury saw through Marcus's testimony. Trust in the system, flawed as it was. Vanessa went home that night to her apartment in Plaza Midwood. She didn't eat. She sat on her second-hand couch, opened her Bible to Proverbs 21 verse 3. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. And she prayed. She prayed for wisdom. She prayed for courage. She prayed for clarity about what God was calling her to do. The answer came in the stillness. The truth. No matter the cost, no matter the outcome, she had to speak the truth. The next morning, Vanessa arrived at the courthouse early. She requested an emergency meeting with Judge Caldwell in chambers. Thomas Whitfield was summoned as well, looking puzzled and slightly annoyed at the disruption to his carefully planned timeline. In the judge's chambers, surrounded by law books and the musty smell of old paper, Vanessa stood before the bench. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. Your Honor, I have reason to believe that the defense has engaged in witness tampering. I believe Marcus Hayes has been paid to provide false testimony against his brother. Judge Caldwell's bushy eyebrows rose. Thomas Whitfield's face went carefully blank. That is a serious allegation, Ms. Monroe, the judge said. Do you have evidence? This was the moment. The cliff's edge. No, Your Honor. Not yet. But I'm requesting that the court order an investigation. Subpoena Marcus Hayes's financial records. Question him under oath about any payments he may have received. Thomas Whitfield stood. His voice was calm, almost bored. Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt by the prosecution to undermine a legitimate defense witness. Ms. Monroe has no evidence because no crime occurred. Marcus Hayes came forward of his own volition. I find it deeply troubling that she would attempt to intimidate a witness with baseless accusations. Judge Caldwell looked at Vanessa for a long moment. She held his gaze. Your Honor, I'm not asking you to believe me without evidence. I'm asking you to seek the truth. Isn't that what we're all here to do? The judge sighed. He was old school, a believer in decorum and established procedure. Ms. Monroe, without probable cause, I cannot order the investigation you're requesting. If you develop evidence of witness tampering, bring it to me immediately. Until then, we proceed. Vanessa felt the floor drop out from under her. She'd spoken up, and it had accomplished nothing except putting Thomas Whitfield on notice. Now he'd be even more careful, more protected. The trial continued. Thomas delivered a masterful closing argument, painting Raymond as a criminal mastermind who'd used his employer's trust to steal and was now trying to shift blame. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Gerald Anderson was acquitted. Raymond Hayes was charged with perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud based on his inconsistent testimony. He received 7 years in prison. Dorothy Chen died 3 months later, her savings gone, her faith in humanity shattered. And Vanessa. Vanessa discovered the price of speaking truth to power. 2 weeks after the verdict, she was called into her supervisor's office. The man who'd mentored her, who'd celebrated her courtroom victories, looked uncomfortable. Vanessa, I need you to understand that this is coming from above my head. Way above. What is? She asked, though she already knew. Your accusation against Thomas Whitfield has caused complications. His firm has significant influence in this county. They've made it clear that they consider your allegations defamatory. The county attorney doesn't want a legal battle we can't win. So what are you telling me? He couldn't meet her eyes. I'm telling you that it would be best for everyone if you resigned. Quietly. We'll give you a good reference for positions outside Mecklenburg County. And if I don't resign? Now he did look at her, and she saw the sadness there. Then I'm instructed to terminate you for conduct unbecoming a public defender, making unsubstantiated allegations against opposing counsel. It'll be on your record. It'll make it very difficult to practice law anywhere. Vanessa sat very still. You believe me, don't you? You know I was right. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely a whisper. It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what I can prove. And Vanessa, sometimes the system protects itself more than it protects justice. She cleaned out her desk that afternoon. 3 years of work in a single cardboard box. When she walked out of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse for the last time, the August heat felt like judgment. But the isolation was just beginning. Her parents, raised to respect authority and to avoid conflict, didn't understand why she couldn't just let it go. You did your best for that boy, her father said. But now you need to think about your future. Take the reference. Get a job somewhere else. Start over. Daddy, they paid a witness to lie. A man is in prison because of it. How can I just start over and pretend that's okay? Her mother touched her hand gently. Baby, you can't fight City Hall. You'll just hurt yourself more. Sometimes you have to accept that the world isn't fair and move on. But Vanessa couldn't move on. She filed a complaint with the North Carolina State Bar, alleging Thomas Whitfield had suborned perjury. The investigation took 8 months. In the end, the bar found insufficient evidence to support the allegation. Marcus Hayes, confronted by investigators, stuck to his story. He'd been well paid to weather the scrutiny. Vanessa tried to find work at other public defender offices across the state. But Thomas Whitfield's firm had connections everywhere. Calls were made. Warnings issued. She was too controversial, too litigious, not a team player. Doors closed. She applied to private firms, to legal aid organizations, to corporate compliance departments. Her resume was impressive, but her reputation preceded her. The woman who'd accused Thomas Whitfield. The troublemaker. The one who didn't know when to let things go. If you've ever stood alone, if you've ever sacrificed something precious because your conscience wouldn't let you do otherwise, take a moment right now to share this video with someone who needs to hear that integrity is never wasted, even when it feels like it costs everything. We're building a community here that believes character matters more than comfort. Drop a comment and let us know. Have you ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right? We read every single one. By the end of 1994, Vanessa Monroe had given up on practicing law. She was 28 years old, carrying student loan debt from her law degree, and working as a paralegal at a small insurance defense firm in Winston-Salem, 2 hours from her family. She made a third of what she'd earned as a public defender. She lived in a studio apartment where she could hear her neighbors' arguments through the walls. At night, she'd lie awake and wonder if she'd made the right choice. Maybe her parents were right. Maybe she should have just stayed quiet, let the trial play out, kept her head down. She'd be in Charlotte still, doing good work, helping people. Instead, she was alone, struggling, her law degree gathering dust. But then she'd think about Dorothy Chen, about Raymond Hayes in prison, about every future victim of Gerald Anderson's schemes. And she'd know bone deep that she'd done the right thing, even if the right thing had cost her everything. Meanwhile, Thomas Whitfield's star continued to rise. His victory in the Anderson case became legendary in legal circles. The brilliant defense that overcame overwhelming evidence. He was invited to speak at law schools. His firm expanded. He was interviewed by the Charlotte Observer about his commitment to justice for all. He bought an estate in Myers Park worth $1.2 million. He joined the board of the Mint Museum. He was photographed at charity galas, always with a beautiful woman on his arm, his smile wide, his conscience apparently unburdened. But appearances, as always, were deceiving. Thomas Whitfield couldn't escape what he'd done. Oh, he tried. He threw himself into work, took on more cases, won more trials. He drank expensive bourbon and told himself that he'd simply played the game the way it had to be played. He'd protected his client. That was his job. But late at night, in his palatial home, he'd think about Vanessa Monroe. Her face in the judge's chambers when she'd asked for an investigation. The absolute certainty in her voice when she'd said, "Isn't that what we're all here to do? Seek the truth." He'd think about Raymond Hayes, rotting in prison for telling the truth. About Dorothy Chen, dead without her savings. About Marcus Hayes, who'd overdosed on heroin 2 years after the trial, the guilt and the drug addiction finally consuming him. Thomas had nightmares sometimes. Dreams where he was standing in front of a judge who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Dreams where every lie he'd ever told, every corner he'd ever cut, was written in fire on the walls around him. He started attending church, Fourth Presbyterian, of course, where senators and CEOs worshipped. He wrote large checks to charity. He sponsored scholarships for underprivileged students. He told himself these were acts of generosity, not atonement. But God has a way of refusing to let the truth stay buried. In 1998, 5 years after the Anderson trial, a young attorney named David Park started working at Whitfield and Associates. Brilliant, hungry, eager to learn from the master. Thomas took him under his wing, mentored him, taught him the art of trial law. One day, David was working late, researching a case in the firm's archives. He found an old file misfiled in a storage box, a folder labeled Anderson Investigative Materials. Inside were notes from the investigator, details about the payments to Marcus Hayes, records of the coaching sessions, everything. David didn't know what to do with the information. He sat in that dusty archive room, holding evidence of a crime his mentor had committed. He could return the file to its misfiled location, pretend he'd never seen it, or he could do something about it. He prayed about it that night. He was a believer too, raised Methodist, trying to navigate the moral complexities of practicing law in a broken system. And God gave him clarity. The next morning, David walked into Thomas Whitfield's office and placed the folder on the mahogany desk. "I found this," he said simply. Thomas went pale. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "What do you want?" "I want to understand," David said. "I want to know if the man I've been learning from is who I thought he was." And Thomas Whitfield, who'd spent 14 years building walls around his shame, finally cracked. He told David everything. The pressure to maintain his record. The moral compromises that had seemed small at first but had grown into chasms. The way he'd justified each decision until he couldn't recognize himself anymore. "I destroyed that woman's career," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "Vanessa Monroe. She was right about everything, and I made sure she paid for telling the truth. I've lived with that for 5 years, David. 5 years of looking over my shoulder, of wondering when it would all come crashing down." David listened. Then he said, "It's not too late to make it right." "Yes, it is," Thomas said. "Raymond Hayes already served his time. He got out last year. Turning myself in now won't change that. It'll just destroy my life, my firm, everyone who depends on me." "Maybe it's not about changing the past," David said quietly. "Maybe it's about choosing who you're going to be going forward." David left the folder on Thomas's desk and walked out. Thomas sat there for hours, staring at the evidence of his sin. Over the next several years, something shifted in Thomas Whitfield. He started taking cases pro bono. Real pro bono, not just the prestigious non-profit board seats that looked good in the society pages. He represented immigrants facing deportation. He helped formerly incarcerated people get their records expunged. He became known for taking cases other high-powered attorneys wouldn't touch. He was still successful, still wealthy, but his motivation had changed. He was trying, in his own way, to balance the scales he'd tipped years before. But the weight of what he'd done to Vanessa Monroe never lifted. He tried to find her once, hired an investigator to locate her. The investigator reported back that she was living in Winston-Salem, working as a paralegal, still carrying student loan debt. The investigator noted, almost as an aside, that she attended Bible study at a small Baptist church every Wednesday night. Thomas wanted to reach out, to apologize, to offer her money or a job or something, anything to ease his guilt. But his attorney advised against it. It could be construed as an admission of wrongdoing. It could reopen investigations. You need to let it go. So Thomas let it go. Or tried to. But guilt is not a burden that can be willed away. It grows heavier with time, fed by every moment of unexpressed remorse. And then came 2025. 32 years after the trial that changed everything. Thomas Whitfield was now 70 years old. Still practicing law but slowing down. His firm had his name on the building, but younger partners ran the day-to-day operations. He'd never married. Never had children. He'd built an empire of professional success on a foundation of moral compromise, and it had left him isolated and alone. That spring, Thomas was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe less. He'd spent his whole life winning, and now he was facing the one opponent no amount of legal brilliance could defeat. Facing death, Thomas found he couldn't maintain the walls anymore. The nightmares got worse. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat. Raymond Hayes's face burned into his mind. He'd see Dorothy Chen, counting out her savings, trusting the banker who was stealing from her. He'd see Vanessa Monroe walking out of the courthouse with a cardboard box. Her career destroyed for telling the truth. In July, Thomas made a decision. He called David Park, now a senior partner at a competing firm. "I need your help," Thomas said. "I need to find Vanessa Monroe." "Why now?" David asked gently. "Because I'm dying," Thomas said. "And I need to make this right while I still can." David found her within a week. Vanessa Monroe had left Winston-Salem in 2010. She'd gone back to school, gotten a master's degree in social work. She was now 56 years old, working as a victim's advocate with the North Carolina Innocence Project, helping overturn wrongful convictions. She'd never stopped fighting for justice, even after the system had failed her. She'd also never stopped going to church. She was a deacon now at her small congregation in Durham. She led prayer groups. She visited the sick. She'd turned her pain into purpose, her suffering into service. David contacted her on Thomas's behalf. Would she be willing to meet with him? He was dying. He had something important to tell her. Vanessa's first response was no. Why should she? What could he possibly say that would matter after 32 years? She'd built a good life despite what he'd done to her. She didn't need his apology or his absolution. But that night, during her prayers, she felt the Spirit prompting her. Forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for you. It's how you lay down burdens you were never meant to carry. She called David back. "I'll meet him. Not at his office. Not on his turf. Tell him to come to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. Tell him to meet me on the front steps. 9 a.m. on August 23rd. August 23rd, 2025. 32 years to the day after the verdict. Thomas Whitfield stood on the courthouse steps that morning, leaning heavily on a cane. The cancer had stolen his strength, his weight, his hair. But it had also stripped away his pretenses. He wore a simple suit, no longer the expensive Italian cuts he'd favored in his prime. His hands shook as he held a manila envelope. Vanessa approached from the parking lot. She walked with confidence, her head high, her Bible tucked under her arm. She'd worn the same navy suit she'd worn to court 3 decades earlier. It still fit, though it was worn at the elbows now. They stood facing each other on the steps where both their lives had changed forever. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said. His voice was raspy, weakened by illness. "I almost didn't," Vanessa replied. Her voice was calm, measured. "I prayed about it. God told me to come." "I don't deserve your time," Thomas said. "I don't deserve your presence. But I need you to hear something." He opened the manila envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a notarized affidavit, a full confession, every detail of the witness tampering, the payments to Marcus Hayes, the coaching, the deliberate suborning of perjury. All of it documented, signed, ready to be filed. "I paid a witness to lie," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "I destroyed Raymond Hayes's life. I destroyed your career. I destroyed my own soul. And I've carried this sin for 32 years, Vanessa. It's eaten me alive from the inside out." He held out the affidavit. "I'm filing this with the State Bar today. I'm requesting they reopen the case, investigate, impose whatever sanctions they deem appropriate. I'm also sending copies to the District Attorney's Office. Raymond Hayes deserves exoneration. You deserve vindication. and I deserve to face the consequences of what I did. Vanessa took the document. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "Why now?" she asked. "Why, after all these years, are you doing this now?" "Because I'm dying," Thomas said simply. "And I realized that I can't stand before God carrying this lie. I can't meet my Maker having never acknowledged what I did to you, to Raymond, to everyone I hurt. Maybe this doesn't change anything for you. Maybe it's too late. But I needed you to know you were right. You were right about everything. And I was wrong." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that Thomas never expected. "I forgave you years ago," she said softly. "Not because you deserved it. Not because you asked for it. But because I couldn't carry the weight of bitterness and still do the work God called me to do. I had to let it go, Thomas. I had to give it to Jesus and trust Him to handle the justice I couldn't get in this world." Thomas staggered slightly, gripping his cane. "How?" he whispered. "How could you forgive me? I destroyed your life." Vanessa smiled, and it was gentle, almost pitying. "You didn't destroy my life. You destroyed my career as a public defender. But you know what? That pushed me into a different path. A better path. I've helped get 17 innocent people out of prison over the last 15 years, Thomas. 17 people who were exactly where Raymond was, caught in a system that valued winning over truth. If I'd stayed in that public defender's office in Charlotte, I might never have found that calling." She stepped closer to him. "God didn't waste my suffering. He used it. He shaped me through it. And yes, it was hard. Yes, there were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if anyone would ever believe me. But I'm standing here today, whole and healed, because I gave that pain to Jesus instead of letting it poison me." Thomas was openly weeping now. "I don't know how to ask this," he said. "But I need to hear it from you. Will you forgive me?" Vanessa reached out and took his shaking hand. "I already told you. I forgave you years ago. But I'll say it again so you can hear it clearly. Thomas Whitfield, I forgive you for what you did to me. I forgive you for the lies you told and the career you destroyed. I forgive you for choosing your record over the truth. And I pray that you find the peace with God that you're seeking." Thomas collapsed onto the courthouse steps, sobbing. Vanessa sat down beside him, this black woman and white man, separated by race and class and history, brought together on the steps of justice by the only force powerful enough to bridge every divide, the radical grace of forgiveness. They sat there for almost an hour talking. Thomas told her about the nightmares, the guilt, the way it had poisoned every success he'd achieved. Vanessa told him about the dark years in Winston-Salem, the struggle to find meaning, the moment she'd surrendered her anger to God and felt the burden lift. "I want to help you," Thomas said finally. "Your work with the Innocence Project. Let me fund it. Let me use my resources to support what you're doing." Vanessa considered this. Then she nodded. "I won't refuse help that can free innocent people. But Thomas, you need to understand something. This confession you're filing? It's going to end your legal career. You might face criminal charges. You're 70 years old and dying, and you're about to destroy your own reputation. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Thomas said. "I spent my whole life building a legacy based on a lie. I don't want to die with that legacy. I want my last act to be the truth. Maybe it can't undo the harm. But it's all I can offer." That afternoon, Thomas Whitfield walked into the North Carolina State Bar Office and filed his confession. Within weeks, the investigation was reopened. Raymond Hayes, now 54 years old, was officially exonerated. His conviction was vacated. He was issued a formal apology from the state of North Carolina. Thomas's law license was suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. His firm, to protect its reputation, removed his name from the building. Former colleagues, people who'd celebrated his victories and benefited from his success, distanced themselves. His obituary, when it came that December, would note his confession and his fall from grace as prominently as his legal achievements. But Thomas Whitfield died at peace. Vanessa Monroe visited him in hospice the week before he passed. She sat by his bedside, read scripture to him, and prayed with him. "Do you think God will forgive me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If I can forgive you," Vanessa said, "how much more will our Father in heaven forgive you when you ask?" Jesus died for every lie you told, Thomas. Every sin you committed. Every person you hurt. His grace is bigger than all of it. You just have to receive it. Thomas Whitfield closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. And Vanessa Monroe, the woman he'd destroyed and who had forgiven him anyway, held his hand as he surrendered his soul to the God who'd been pursuing him for 70 years. Raymond Hayes attended Thomas's funeral. So did 17 people who'd been freed from prison through Vanessa's work. So did David Park and a handful of attorneys who'd witnessed Thomas's transformation in his final years. The service was small, held at Fourth Presbyterian Church. The pastor spoke about the parable of the prodigal son, about the father who ran to embrace the child who'd squandered everything. He spoke about how it's never too late to come home to God. Never too late to tell the truth. Never too late to be forgiven. Vanessa spoke too. She stood at the pulpit in that grand church, this daughter of West Charlotte who'd lost everything and gained it back in ways that couldn't be measured in courtroom victories or professional prestige. "Thomas Whitfield wronged me," she said simply. "He hurt me deeply. He cost me my career and years of my life. But the story doesn't end there. Because God took what Thomas meant for harm and turned it into something beautiful. He took my suffering and shaped me into someone who could help others who were suffering. He took my loss and transformed it into purpose." She looked at the casket. And Thomas found his way back to the truth. It took him 32 years. It cost him everything he'd built. But he did it. He stood on those courthouse steps and told the truth, and in doing so he set himself free. The service ended with Amazing Grace. The congregation sang about a wretch saved by grace, about being lost and found, about sight restored to the blind. And every person in that sanctuary understood, perhaps for the first time, what those words truly meant. Now here's what I want you to think about tonight, wherever you are. We live in a world that tells us to protect ourselves, to cover our mistakes, to never admit we were wrong because it might cost us something. We live in a world that values winning over integrity, success over honesty, reputation over character. But this story, Vanessa's story, Thomas's story, it shows us something different. It shows us that the truth will find its way to the light eventually. That the lies we tell to protect ourselves become the prisons we live in. That forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible. That grace is real. Vanessa Monroe lost her career for telling the truth. But she gained her integrity, her peace, her purpose, and ultimately, her freedom. She learned that God doesn't waste our suffering. He uses it to refine us, to shape us, to prepare us for the work He has for us. Thomas Whitfield spent 32 years running from the truth. But in his final months, he turned around and ran toward it instead. And he discovered that confession, even when it costs us everything, brings a peace that all the professional success in the world could never provide. If you're carrying something heavy tonight, a lie you've told, a wrong you've done, a burden of guilt that's eating you alive, know this: it's never too late to tell the truth. Never too late to make things right. Never too late to receive forgiveness, both from the people you've hurt and from the God who's been waiting for you to come home. And if you're the one who's been wronged, who's been betrayed, who's lost something precious because someone else chose their comfort over your well-being, know this too: forgiveness doesn't mean what they did was okay. It means you're choosing not to carry the weight of their sin anymore. You're choosing to give it to Jesus and let Him handle the justice you couldn't get in this world. Because in the end, we all stand before the same judge. The courtroom that matters most isn't in Mecklenburg County or anywhere else on this earth. It's the one where every secret is revealed, every lie is exposed, and every act of courage is remembered. What will your testimony be? If this story has touched something in your spirit, if it's reminded you of a truth you needed to hear, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs it. Share it with the person who's struggling with guilt. Share it with the person who's wrestling with forgiveness. Share it with the person who needs to know that integrity matters, even when it costs everything. And leave a comment below. Tell us what this story meant to you, or share a moment when you had to choose between what was easy and what was right. This community is built on people who believe that truth matters, that character counts, that God can redeem any story. We read every comment, and we're grateful you're here. Thank you for spending this time with us at Story Haven. Until next time, may you have the courage to speak truth, the strength to forgive, and the faith to believe that God is working even in the stories that break your heart. God bless you.